Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the GCA Forum for the fall quarter of 2022. We ask that you please make sure that you are muted in order to reduce the background noise during the presentation. And if you have any questions, please use the chat feature in Zoom. We will pause after each segment to answer them. We want you to be engaged. This meeting is for you. As an FYI, we have about 45 or 50 minutes of content prepared. So, there is that time for questions if you want to ask them. And hopefully this will be a good opportunity to learn about these topics. Our agenda, we're going to talk about Grant Tracker and how it's going to be transferred to Award Portal, not really transferred, how it's going to be replaced with Award Portal after the finance transformation. We're going to do a deep dive into Carryover. We're going to talk about budget period versus project period. We're going to talk about the different types of extensions, indirect cost calculation, and then close with some tips and tricks. And first up is Cheryl Haycox talking about Grant Tracker to Award Portal.
All right. Thank you, Susan. All right. So as Susan kind of mentioned, we are going to be replacing Grant Tracker with a new system. It's going to be called Award Portal. Susan, you want to hit the next slide? Thanks. So I just kind of wanted to do a high level, what is happening? And so the first thing to know is that Grant Tracker is going to be retired and once we go live in the Workday system. And the second thing is that because we love Grant Tracker so much and because it holds so much information, we're going to keep it as a reference after go live because we won't be able to transfer everything in there into the new Award Portal. The goal is for Award Portal to be that place where you can go for at a glance of your award. And one thing for all y'all to know is that we are modeling the Award Portal as after Grant Tracker as much as we possibly can. Of course, there's new, Workday is providing a whole new look. And so this will also have a whole new look. So I'm going to try to share a few screens that I feel like are in pretty good order, just to give you a view. But I also want to do a full disclosure that what you see may or may not be how the final product looks. We're really early in the system or in the process. The next slide, please. I'm going to start really nice and high level. We have some new terms. So instead of Grant Tracker, we're going to start using the word Award Portal. Instead of sending a note back and forth between GCA, it's going to be a ticket. So question ID will become ticket ID. Instead of a budget number, we're going to be using award line. And instead of add file, the Award Portal is going to say attachments. And the big change really is org code to cost center. So that information just recently came over, and there's going to probably be a lot more as we move forward. Okay, Susan, the next slide is I wanted to do, this is really sort of like in Grant Tracker, how there are sections. So we have, budget information, open Grant Tracker notes, financial information, etc. So that's kind of a view on the left. And on the right is the current look of Award Portal. So I up at the, just sort of some things to kind of note is that up across the very top, you'll see this says, I wanted to have one that actually had an award number because the awards are going to be kind of, I think, how we identify things. And then below that, you're going to have like the grant information, any open tickets, award line financial information. And that's where you'll see, I guess the only way to kind of liken it is to sub budgets, but there's going to be potentially a lot of award lines. One thing that's going to be kind of great is we're going to have tasks. So this might be a report, that's due, or and I think I believe it's also going to have like department tasks like narratives or progress reports. And then of course invoicing and receipts, which we don't have that information in Workday yet. Okay. And then Susan, the next slide. Thank you. So what we're working on right now is the communication piece of the award portal. And so on the left, this is how you would create a new note in Grant Tracker. And on the right is how you would create a new ticket in award portal. And you can see it's laid out a little differently, but the fields we've kept as the same. There's still some work to be done here. One improvement is that we've got more options for formatting. We can do, if you want to bold something important or underline or do my favorite, which are some bullet points, just want to really call out the important stuff. So that's kind of a nice option that we've got. The next screen is going to show searching by sponsor. And boy, this looks a little different, but we did try to keep stuff similar. So on the left is Grant Tracker, and on the right, of course, is Award Portal. And so we still have the vertical, I lost the little thing where you can filter or sort, which will help you with the search. What is kind of good to see is how different it looks. Like you can see we've got award names, which are longer, and we've got grant numbers are longer. Obviously, I think we're going from 6-digit budget numbers to something longer. So we're going to have a different look for sure. One thing we did keep is on the kind of the top right, we're going to keep the ability to search by a budget number because I think it's going to take us a while to really fully convert over. Probably a few years, really, because we're still going to have old budget numbers that are live for a while. So that's going to be just kind of another way to search. And I think my last screen is the landing page. Up top is Grant Tracker, should look nice and familiar. And below is, and this is rough draft, so it's how it's kind of looking now. And it's the award information. And so we're trying to keep the same types of information. I think there's some things that are going to be new and some things that we maybe don't need as much, but we're really trying to keep it looking the same. So I think some other things that I'm kind of excited about in Award Portal is we're going to have links built in that will take you from Award Portal directly into Workday, and then another link, a separate link that will take you directly into the read-only version of Grant Tracker. So we thought that might be something really good. That's like, okay, this is what I'm seeing in Award Portal. I want to go to Workday. It's just going to be hopefully a click and off you go. So I also want to apologize. I know a lot of these images are super small and hard to read. That was a little bit on purpose because I don't know that this is exactly how it's going to look. Actually, I do know this is not exactly how it's going to look. I think my last slide about questions.
And we do have one question in the chat. For the award portal, will there be a way to search by PI name for all grants, even those closed from Grant Tracker?
I think we do have a PI name. Susan, can we go back a couple slides to the search?
And Chris can add to the chat, but I think the question was also kind of touching on like closed budget. So if a budget is closed before the migration over to Workday, will you still be able to research it in Workday?
So I think that's going to depend. And I think it's going to depend on when it closed. So we are not bringing everything over for sure. So if an award, and I don't know what the criteria is. I don't think that's been determined on like how much information. So I'm just going to, kind of take a guess here, but if a budget ended in like 2020, would we really want to bring that over? And I'm saying budget. I mean, I'm going to say project. If a project ended a few years ago, it might not be in a award portal or Workday. But if it's one budget of a series that's been going on for like 5 years or more, that could be a real different story. I think that kind of information might come over. Again, there's a lot that they're still working on, and information is slowly converting into Workday, which is what's kind of informing our decisions, as far as how are things looking.
Okay, just as I think a follow-up question to that is going to be, so for if stuff is not moved over into award portal, does that mean we're thinking of keeping Grant Tracker as a reference for an extended period?
Oh yeah, I think
Okay.
we're going to need. Yeah, it's not going to just be for a few months.
So people aren't going to lose access to that.
No, but what will happen is it will become read only, so it'll just be a resource.
Okay. We have additional questions. Will status numbers from FIN still apply, like 1, 2, 3, and 4?
They will, but they will not be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Workday has different, I think it's like open and closed, and it's got different things. So it won't be the numbers like you see. I think there's probably behind the scenes code, but obviously what we're seeing now is because Finn's so old, we're seeing the code like 1, 2, and that kind of thing. So yes, it does. And you will be able to see what's been closed.
Okay. Additional question. Will award portal have a record retention trigger date field similar to Grant Tracker?
That is such a great question. We are fighting hard for it because we don't know where else that might live. And so that's what award portal is also going to serve, is like, if this can't be in Workday, can we make it happen in award portal? And so right now the record retention date lives in Grant Tracker. So that is on, just as a side note, that is on the table for sure. And that's something that the developers are looking at. How will they do that?
Okay. And an additional question. Will award portal be used by both GCA and OSP for tickets?
No, award portal is going to be just like Grant Tracker. This is a GCA tool, and it will be for campus and GCA to communicate back and forth on grants.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And next up, we have Jonathan with Carryover.
Thank you, Susan. So that's me. I'm Jonathan. Today, I'm going to be giving you a deep dive on Carryover. Now, Carryover is one of those terms that you hear all the time. The concept sounds simple enough, moving funds from one budget period to the next. But in practice, there are a number of factors that can turn your breezy expectations into quite a headache. Next slide, please. Now, if we're doing a deep dive, it feels like the best place to start would be with a definition. What exactly is carryover? Now, the National Institutes of Health, one of our biggest sponsors, defines carryover as a process through which unobligated funds remaining at the end of the budget period may be carried forward to the next budget period. You'll notice that we bolded some of the words on this slide. Those are key phrases, and understanding what those are and what they aren't is crucial to understanding carryover. Next slide, please. The first phrase we have is unobligated funds, and the key word here is unobligated. So this is funding that we have not spent or committed to spending. The other phrase highlighted in that quote from the NIH was budget period. And a budget period is a subsection of the total award period during which you are authorized to spend funds. I've included a screenshot from the budget tab of Grant Tracker, where you can see the current budget period, which is 1 year, broken out against the total award period, which is just under 5 years. If this award has an unobligated balance at the end of the current budget period, it will be moved to the next budget period as carryover. Next slide, please. Next, let's look at the different types of carryover. How your award handles carryover will be determined by the award document, and GCA notes the carryover terms for the department's reference whenever we complete a funding action. In general, there are 2 main types of carryover. Automatic carryover is when we are allowed to move funds between budget periods without obtaining additional approval from the sponsor. Restricted carryover, on the other hand, requires that we obtain specific approval from the sponsor each time we wish to move unobligated funds from one period to the next. A third, less common category is a sort of other group that includes scenarios like separate year accountability, where we do have authorization to move funds between budget periods as long as we meet certain criteria. And of course, some awards forbid carryover entirely, requiring that any unobligated funds be returned to the sponsor after each budget period. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've established some definitions. Now let's talk about how carryover actually works. One of the first things to know is that your award's carryover type will have a significant impact on how the resulting budget is set up. With automatic carryover, we have approval from the sponsor to commingle the funds for all budget periods. As such, GCA sets up a single budget to cover the entire award period. So, in a way, awards with automatic carryover will often not have any visible carryover at all. The other most common scenario is restricted carryover. And since we obviously can't commingle each budget period's funds at all in these situations, GCA will set up a budget number for each distinct budget period. A third, less common scenario is, again, other, or subject to sponsor limitations that we saw on the last slide. In these cases, carryover is neither fully authorized nor fully restricted, and we will have to tailor our budget setup to meet the needs of the specific award in question. An example of this type of award is called separate year accountability, which we've illustrated here. In this case, the sponsor wants us to keep the budget period's funds separate for reporting purposes, but approves us moving unobligated funds from one period to the next once the reporting has been completed. To address this, we will typically create a parent budget that will span the entire award period, and each budget period will be handled by a single sub-budget, with unobligated balances carried from sub-budget to sub-budget in turn. On a final note, as we mentioned earlier, carryover is determined by the award document, and sponsors are free to set their own terms and conditions. So there will always be budgets who don't quite fit into one of these categories. If you're not sure how your budget is set up with regards to carryover, feel free to reach out to GCA for help. Next slide, please. Now, digging a little deeper into the details, carryover is one of the last things that happens as an expired budget is closed, after all allocable expenditures have posted to the budget and the final invoice or report, whichever is later, is being processed. This ensures that our final expenditure total is accurate, which in turn ensures that we carry over the correct amount to the continuation. As for the details of how the funds are carried over, the mechanics are different depending on whether the funds are carried over as available or restricted. Next slide, please. Now, as we said earlier, when carryover is automatic, sometimes there won't actually be a carryover process at all, as all of the funds will be available on the same budget throughout the whole award period. But there are some cases, like separate year accountability, where carryover is not automatic. So each budget period has its own budget, but we do get approval from the sponsor to move unobligated funds to be spent in future budget periods. In those cases, the unobligated funds will be moved to the continuation budget in object code 3800, which is unallocated direct costs, and 2599, which is for indirect costs. This is just the default, however. If you would like to allocate these funds to other object codes, you can complete the request for rebudgeting form linked here from the GCA website and submit it to GCA via Grant Tracker under the budget setup topic. Next slide, please. Now we're at the fun one, carrying over funds when carryover is restricted. I can hear the question, wait, if carryover is restricted, why are we doing the carryover at all? And in short, it's because that funding is still technically part of the award, so we need to keep track of it. It is entirely possible that the sponsor will release the funds to be spent in the future. And so until they do, or until they decide to deobligate the funds from the award entirely, we need a way to keep track of the funds while ensuring that they are not commingled with the funds we do have authorization to spend. This is accomplished by moving the funds to the continuation budget in Object Code 3799, which is restricted fund, and establishing an encumbrance on the budget to prevent the restricted funds from being spent. Restricted carryover is not the only reason that grant funding would be restricted. Funds can also be restricted for a can work with OSP to have a post-award change or PAC created to release the funds. Once that is sent over to GCA, the funds will be transferred out of 3799 and the encumbrance will be reduced, allowing the funds to be spent. Next slide, please. Now we're on to part 3, special cases. And our first special case is training grants, which are big and messy and a bit too much to get into in detail in this presentation. What we will say for these currently is that if you have any questions about your training grant carryover, please reach out to GCA and we will be happy to work through it with you. Next slide, please. Our other special case concerns carryover between awards. All of what we've been discussing involves carrying funds between budget periods that are part of the same award period. As many of you know, however, it is very common for projects to extend across many award periods. Looking back at training grants, for example, we have many programs that have been running for several decades across a number of multi-year awards. So if we have an unobligated balance at the end of an award period and the sponsor has given us another award as a continuation, are we allowed to carry that budget to the new balance? What if we are finishing out one project from the sponsor, but we have another related project that's ongoing? Can we move the funds then? And the answer is maybe. The end of an award period is a very common time for sponsors to ask that UW return any unobligated funds. And as a general rule, it's best to not assume you can carry funds from one award to the other, even if they're related. With that said, the sponsor is the ultimate arbiter of what happens with their funding. And if they approve your inter-award carryover, we are more than happy to help with that. Get your sponsor to send you their approval in writing and forward that approval to OSP. They will send GCA a PAC and we will get those funds moved to their new home. Next slide, please. To finish us up, when in doubt, ask. Carryover is, as you've seen, a complicated process, and we don't expect you to suddenly understand everything after one deep dive presentation. We hope that this presentation has given you some useful information, but if you have any questions about how your grant handles carryover, we encourage you to reach out. GCA is happy to answer any questions you have about your awards carryover process. Any questions? So I'm the one for the chat. I am seeing. Oh no, was everyone able to hear me? Lori says she wasn't able to hear. Okay, well, sorry, Lori. Okay, currently in the situation of parent budget with sub budgets, we have to roll up to the parent to rebudget. Will we still be able to rebudget from sub to sub in the future? I think that's a future state question, so I'm going to defer that to Cheryl.
I thought that might be coming my way. I actually don't know the precise answer, but what I think is being asked is about like a TransPAS-U situation where you're trying to transfer money from a parent into a sub. And all I can say is what my understanding is that that is going to be handled through Sage, which is a big change. So I do not think that that will be a transaction that you would request through Award Portal. Again, with the finance transformation bit, I feel like we don't actually know a lot about, or we don't know all the things about what a Workday is going to be able to do. But regarding the rebudget, that may also take place in Sage. But I want to say I'm not sure for sure.
The next two questions, they're kind of continuations on the trend of basically how will what I just talked about apply to award portal and Workday. And I think, and Cheryl can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the short answer is we don't really have specifics for you right now. But we will, when we have the specifics, we will absolutely share them with you to make sure that you guys know what's going on. And yeah, so because of we have one question about accountant object codes for the future for finance transformation instead of what was currently shown, and I don't think we can answer that quite yet.
I think I know we all want to know these answers, and I think we just don't know, especially at this level. I think there may be people on the finance transformation team that have an idea about this, but we don't know we don't know our processes yet. Just to kind of like set what I do know is that they haven't even brought over all the information into Workday yet. So I guess you could say the sandbox is missing some sand. And so until that's all there, and then we get to see how it works, we're going to have kind of two processes or two things that I kind of think about. One is the converted information. How is that going to look? I don't know. And then how is the new information, like when GCA starts actually setting up grants in the system, so there's no reference into grant tracker because they've just only ever been in Workday. Are they going to look different? I think I just don't know. So I don't know if that kind of helps kind of let you guys know what we know.
Yeah, so we have an additional question. In the prior presentation, did you say that budget numbers will continue to be used until the current grant cycles end, and then we will cut over to work tags?
Maybe I can clarify that. Sorry. So what I'm saying is that we are still going to have, if there is a budget number that gets converted over, we're using that as a way to search. But that budget number will have a new award number, award line, grant line. So it will have both. And we just wanted to have the ability to search by a budget number because that's what we're going to be mostly familiar with, but we're going to have to make the move to the new format.
And then looks like the last question, are you able to comment on what the future state looks like, including whether carryover will flow through award modifications in Sage or simply be handled by GCA?
I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, and I know that that's not the greatest answer to give a lot of people. I think the and Cheryl, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the message to take away is that, like from a presentation like what I just gave is the concepts and what we have to do with the funds and when we have to restrict funds, when we can carry it over as available. That's all dictated by like the award documents. So that will have to stay the same, but how we actually, the specifics of how we process it is going to depend on what ends up happening in award portal, and we don't have quite enough specifics to give you guys details on that yet.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So the mechanics, like what we presented today, is obviously the current state. But like Jonathan said, it's really going to be a lot about what is the award document or the agreements. What does that tell us to do? And I think it's probably not going to be until next spring. I'm hoping that we'll be able to know. We're going to have a really good idea of like how is GCA going to do the things that we need to be doing. And then I can imagine a future forum that might be super intense, but we should have answers.
Okay, that is the last question. So I will bow out. Thank you all.
And next up, I am going to give a brief overview of budget period versus project period when working with grant budgets. This is a frequently asked question. Someone will contact us via email or grant tracker and say, this is a multi-year award and I've looked at our award agreement. It doesn't end until 2026. How come the end date in my FD is in 2023? The answer here is usually due to budget period versus project period. Project period is the term we use for the full lifespan of an award, or in some cases, a 3 or 5 year cycle within a long running project. I think we have some training grants at UW that are almost as old as I am, maybe older. And we'll use generally their project period to be the current 5 year cycle, not the whole multi-decades of the award. These project periods can contain multiple budget periods or a single budget period. It depends on how the award is set up. And you'll also see it referred to as the total period. Whereas the budget period is the time period where we are authorized to spend a specified block of award funding. And you'll also see it referred to as the current period. In Grant Tracker, and this goes back to something that Jonathan was showing in the previous presentation, Grant Tracker lists budget and project periods for all budgets. I'm showing one example here where the budget period matches the project period. Notice the current period and total period, as we use those terms in Grant Tracker, are exactly the same. And then we have another one where the budget period falls within a larger project period. It's like this example, the current period is the first year of a 5-year award cycle that's going to run through 2026. What that is saying is basically we expect that you will have these funds or this award through 2026, but you can currently on this budget spend through 8/31/22. So you may ask, why doesn't my budget period match my project period? I'm looking at my award agreement. I see that 2026 end date. Well, it all depends on the terms of the award agreement. If GCA needs to issue a final invoice and/or a final financial report before the award as a whole ends, then the award will need to be set up with multiple budget periods. We call it separate accountability. And what you will usually see then is you will get a renewal budget. You'll have a new budget number for the new budget period. And in some cases, a careful reading of the agreement for a large award with a long project period, especially, will reveal that they are only authorizing UW to spend a fraction of those funds over a subset of the award period. In these cases, GCA will set up the funding level and budget end dates based on what is currently authorized only. And when the sponsor does authorize additional funding and/or time, usually through an award amendment, we will extend the budget period accordingly, or if it's additional funding only, we will increase the award amount accordingly. So I have a couple of examples. This first one is a pretty standard sub-award agreement. You'll see it has a period of performance of September 2021 to August 2022, and then an estimated project period going through 2026. So that first period, the one that's from 2021 through August 2022, is going to be set up as the budget period, and then the 2026 end date will be for the project period. So if you're asking, am I going to keep the same budget number throughout this, you're going to dig a little bit further into the award. And here I've copied in the carry forward section, which says, yes, carry forward is automatic. And in this case, yes, we will keep the same budget number and extend its end date, unless there's something elsewhere in the award that has some kind of separate financial reporting or invoicing requirement, or if the award number changes. But in most cases, when you have this automatic carry forward, you will keep the same budget number. The second example is one of our more complex types of award. It's one that happens to come from the Office of Naval Research. And this is something that's pretty standard for them, but pretty different from most of the agreements we get from other sponsors. These two blocks that are here in the example are from two consecutive amendments. The one on top, you see where it has at that point a grant total of 4.5 million. This particular action was supplementing that. And then the period of performance ran through 2019. And we got a amendment to this award that gave us quite a bit more funding, but only currently obligated $500,000 of it, but added future funding, which brought the total up to 7.5 million, and added the period, extended the period of performance through May of 2021. Now, if you weren't looking at the previous award, you wouldn't really know that this was an extension. It doesn't say here on this first page that that 2021 date is a period of performance extension. This is one of those cases where, if we, as we often tell you, it's really helpful to read the award, the whole award, or at least to look at it closely. Because in this case, a few pages later, we have a section that clarifies exactly what's going on in this amendment. We're exercising option 1, which was that whole additional chunk of money, but we're exercising it partially because we can only spend $500,000 of that chunk of money, and extending the period of performance through May of 2021. And all other terms and conditions remain unchanged. So, are there any questions? Doesn't look like there's anything at the chat. So I will hand this off to Patrick to talk about extensions.
Alrighty. So I will be talking about kind of the various different versions of extensions and how some of what these prior comments, including carryover and project periods, how they apply and what we will be using to extend the budget's period. Next slide. So we're going to look at 5 main different types. The no-cost extension, which is most simple, temporary extensions, supplement extensions, and then on the other side, an advanced renewal or advanced budget extensions. All right, we'll start off with the simple no-cost extension. These are when the sponsor is adding additional time to an award, but no new money. These are routed to GCA as a PAC or a post-award change and are the simplest of all these different variances. These are common when the sponsor is allowing you more time to spend unused funds at the end of the budget, but are not giving more money as you still have the funds to spend. So they want us to spend out what we have, so they're giving us more time. Next slide. Temporary extensions. So these are used when an extension is expected, a no-cost extension, but we don't have the amendment yet. And it looks like it may take some time to get the signature process completed. If that's the case, you can request a temporary extension and GCA will extend the end date to keep your budget open. It is important to note that the sponsor is not responsible to reimburse for any expenses that post during a temporary extension period, should the amendment not come through. This is why a guarantee budget is required, as if transactions post and then the extension does not come through, the sponsor is not responsible for those and they will need to be covered by a department budget. Next slide. Supplement extensions. These are used when the sponsor is adding funds as well as extending the period, but are most tricky when comparing to a renewal budget. We will use a supplement extension if the budget's terms meet 3 criteria. First, if the carryover is automatic or prior funds are not distinguished from the new funds and can be invoiced together. Second, if there are no requirements for any final financial reports or final invoices each period. And finally, that the grant or award number does not change. If any of these 3 are not met, GCA will likely set up a renewal budget instead of supplementing and extending your existing budget. Next slide. That brings us to kind of the counter, the renewals, or in this case, advanced renewal if the amendment is not received yet. These are used to establish a renewal budget when the sponsor is going to fund a new period, but sort of on the flip end of those supplement extensions. So these are used in place of a supplement extension if carryover is not automatic, the award does require a separate final financial report or invoice at the close of each period, or a new PO or grant number is issued for this period. In those instances, we will set up a renewal budget. Next slide. Finally, we're looking at advanced budget extensions. These are used to add more time to a budget that is in advanced status. This can either be a new budget or a renewal budget. And it is important to note that advanced budget periods may not exceed 18 months, as this is the limit that we have set for the time we can have them established before they're actually completed and awarded. Okay, next slide. I think, are there any questions?
There do not seem to be any questions in the chat.
Okay, next we
Well,
have.
we just had one come in. We also had someone say that was super helpful. Thank you. So good job. And then the question is, does anyone know how often a detailed SAGE budget matching the award commitment will be required on renewals and or supplement extensions?
Not quite sure I'm understanding. So if you're talking about new funds for the amount awarded, GCA, we use whatever budget is provided for any funds awarded, but if there isn't any detailed budget provided and we are allowed rebudgeting, that won't necessarily prevent us from setting up the budget or supplement extending, and we'll usually put them in the kind of uncategorized 38 object code, as well as your indirect cost, and put a comment that that's what we did. You can then ask us to update the budget anytime to move those into whatever budget categories you were using for those funds. I hope that kind of hit it.
It looks like he's going to route that question to OSP. And then we have another question. Will no-cost extensions still use the same easy-to-use form with finance transformation? And I think that's going to be one of those boilerplate answers of we don't have enough detail yet. I think I can say with some confidence, though, that we will do our very best to make sure that the form, if it still exists, will be as familiar and easy to use as possible.
Yeah,
And I'm going to maybe add on to that. The no cost extension is something that's handled through OSP right now. So I think that might be something, it may be in SAGE and it may be even simpler. We don't know. But since we're post-award, we usually get the back end of the extensions, like after they've been approved. So I think this is a question we would not be able to answer.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I think we can go ahead and go to indirect cost with Azalea.
Thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. It's me, Azalea. So today I am going to discuss how the UW and GCA calculates the indirect costs on your sponsored awards. First off, I would like to begin with a disclaimer regarding the use of indirect costs versus the other term, facilities and administrative costs, also known as F&A costs. They mean the exact same thing. And uniform guidance uses both phrases interchangeably, even in the same sentence, which can be super confusing. So for consistency in this presentation, I will be saying indirect costs throughout my presentation. All right, next slide, please. So what are indirect costs? This slide has the official definition of indirect costs as written in the uniform guidance. But essentially, indirect costs are institutional costs that are not specifically applicable to individual research projects, but they're real costs that institutions like the UW incur during day-to-day operations. So what are these costs? So they are costs for general operations, such as utilities and building operations, research administration, such as yourselves, general administration, such as OSP, GCA, procurement, and the ISD, And they are also library and custodial services. Indirect costs support a lot of things here at the UW, which is why the goal is to shoot for the full indirect cost rate when we submit proposals to potential sponsors. Next slide. So how are indirect costs calculated? Indirect costs are calculated by multiplying an indirect cost rate with an appropriate base based on the sponsor's terms and conditions. The UW rates are determined by Management Accounting and Analysis, MAA, and they are approved by the Division of Cost Allocation at the Department of Health and Human Services, so DHHS. A base is the direct costs to which the indirect cost rate is applied. So bases can vary depending on which type of expenditures are included or excluded from the indirect cost calculations. For non-federal awards, the sponsor requirements should be followed. And in the absence of any requirement, the total direct cost base will be used. Next slide. If a common indirect cost base is used by the sponsor, a very popular one is modified total direct costs, also known as MTDC, your budget can have the indirect costs automatically calculated by the UW's financial system. We have 31 different indirect cost bases programmed into our financial system. So there's a good chance that your budget will fit one of those. And the indirect costs will post to the budget at the same time the direct costs are posted. Next slide. So what happens if we need to make a correction to either your indirect cost rate, your base, or both? Budgets with common indirect cost bases will be able to go through our automated indirect cost adjustment process. All sponsored budgets go through an automated review process every Monday morning. And if a correction is needed, you will receive an automated grant tracker message notifying you of the pending IDC JV. This automated grant tracker message will be sent to the budget contacts listed in Grant Tracker. However, if no contacts are listed, the default recipient of that notification will be the PI. So if you want to get these messages or any messages from GCA, please make sure to add or update the budget contacts in Grant Tracker. Next slide. So here on this slide, I have an example of what that Grant Tracker notification will look like. So you're going to get this. It's going to be in completed status because there's not really, much to talk about in this one. It's just a very brief message letting you know that we're going to make some sort of change on your budget. Either we undercharged or we overcharged IDC based on an earlier issue that you may have brought up in a previous email or grant tracker. So the message is really short and sweet. And in this example, we owe a credit to a department of about $15,000. Next slide. So attached to the grant tracker notification is also a spreadsheet detailing how we calculated that adjustment. So that way you have a record of how we were able to determine that amount, and then you can verify yourself if you feel like that is the correct amount that you were expecting to show up on your budget. Okay, next slide. And here is just a screenshot of the JV that posts when we have to process an adjustment to your budget. All right, next slide, please. So unfortunately, not all budgets can go through the automated IDC calculation and correction process. These budgets include budgets with subcontract expenditures, and that's because IDC on subcontracts can only be calculated manually. Budgets with non-standard bases, we have to perform workarounds to charge IDC correctly because they don't fit into any one of the 31 preset bases that we have. And unfortunately, we have two very buggy bases. That's base 4 and base 24. And the reason why they're buggy is they can't handle credits to your budget. So if you have either of these bases on your budget and you do a transfer, you may notice that your IDC is wonky. Next slide. So budgets that require manual indirect cost calculations or corrections are reviewed quarterly. For both non-standard indirect cost bases and bases with known bugs, we include grant control flag 11 on the budget to help us monitor the budgets. We use exception reports that look for budgets with 0362 charges or grant control flag 11, and then we also prioritize budgets by end date. Next slide. If you think there may be an issue with your indirect cost charges, please let us know by sending us a grant tracker request under the indirect cost topic. And please give us time to complete these inquiries. Depending on the issue, these requests can be very complicated to unwind and fix. And also as a PSA, when you have a very late pending transaction, that includes late subcontract invoices. If indirect costs still need to be charged, this can add another week to an already delayed financial report or invoice. Next slide. And that concludes my high-level presentation on indirect costs, the auto and manual calculations process. Are there any questions?
We do have a question in the chat. So the question is, how does it work when purchases are made when there are different IDC rates? For example, a project takes place both on campus and off campus. Is there programming built in to know which IDC rate to use, like on a Pro Card transaction?
No, so the only way that we can charge the IDC accurately, if a project has two different indirect cost rates, you have to create a sub budget for that other indirect cost rate. Budgets can only have one indirect cost rate programmed to it. We try to catch those at budget setup. So if we review your proposal and the budget's attached and we notice that there's two rates, so maybe the main budget is, it's got like, 55.5, and then there's an off-campus segment of it, the 26%, we'll automatically set up that sub budget if we can catch it. We can't catch it all the time. So then that's why we have that default notification that says, if you need, to set up a sub budget, please send a transpazoo as soon as possible so we can get that set up for you. So you don't have to worry about, transferring charges because they're on the parent, they should be on the sub. And also proposal budgets are not always 100% solid. So that's another reason why we may not set one up automatically. But if we can, we will. If we can't, please send us a transpazoo as soon as possible. All right, next question.
Follow up, can we set up a sub budget for different IDC rates if the award is under $250,000?
Ooh, that's a good question, because I know what that's touching on. I think, I don't know why, but sometimes this can be a little bit tricky. I know that hasn't come up in a while. So I want to say yes, but it's going to be something that we're going to have to examine along with you to see if it's a kind of a special case where we would do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's in one of the gyms, they do talk about for less than 250,000, we would not set up the sub. But I also know that if it's requested, I think that we would look at it and see if there's a reason that we could, or, find out what we can. And nobody's asked, but I do want to give you some good news with with Workday. Sub budgets are going to automatically have their own award line. So no longer will GCA have to manually go in and calculate the indirect cost. So that is one feature of the new system. So that if whatever the rates are for that thing, for that particular sub award, that's going to be how that award line is set up.
Oh, that's welcome news. Are there any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
All right, thank you guys.
And now we have tips and tricks with Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle, and as we wrap up, I'm just going to go over a few topics that we've been receiving some questions about. Next slide, please. So first is selecting a topic for your grant tracker request. So when you're creating a new request, one of the fields you're completing is the topic field. And this is a drop-down menu that's pre-programmed. So you're just going to choose the topic from this list that best matches your request. So some examples, if you're submitting a rebudget request, budget setup would probably fit the best. Whereas if you're looking to have your budget closed to status 3 in preparation for closeout, closing would probably make the most sense. Next slide, please. So if you're not sure which topic to go with, or you need more clarification on what all these topics mean, we have a glossary. So this can be accessed by clicking on the question mark icon, which is right next to the topic field. And hopefully these definitions will help narrow down your choices. But if your request covers, multiple topics, or you're just really not sure, just try to choose one that you think fits best and route over your request. And if needed, we can still change the topic if needed on our end. So not a problem at all. Next slide, please. And another question we get is about the PI name on TransPSU forms. So I think the TransPSU form can be kind of confusing because it does ask for a PI name and EID. So you're only going to list a PI and EID if you're requesting a sub-budget or an award budget. But for gift budgets, you're actually just listing a position title such as chair, dean, or director, because the understanding is that gift funds are managed by the department and not a specific individual. And then next slide. Final question we have is about surplus budget restrictions. So just to quickly define, surplus funds are the remaining award funds that we're allowed to retain per the sponsor's guidance. And these funds aren't restricted, but they're also not discretionary. So you can't use them for like anything you want, like however you want. The expenditures should still support research to an extent. So like some examples of expenditures would be like salary or like lab supplies, travel, or deficits on other award budgets. And then finally, on my last slide, I have some additional resources in case you want to read up further on these topics that I just covered. And that's all I have. Any questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
All right, thank you.
Well, as a heads up, our next forum will be in February of 2023, already in 2023. Hopefully at that point, we'll have 3 months more knowledge about what's going to happen after financial transformation. Be on the lookout. We will be sending a survey about today's forum very soon. And unless Cheryl or any of the other grant analysts have anything to add, I think we would wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for coming, you guys. Great questions today.